"That young man will be one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived," said 84-year-old Rosa Williams as she watched 22-year-old Shai Gilgeous-Alexander struggle through his rookie season on her small TV. Her great-grandson laughed at her bold prediction. Shai was averaging just 10 points per game and looked lost on the court. But Rosa had been watching basketball for 70 years, had seen every legend play, and possessed an uncanny ability to recognize greatness before anyone else could see it. What Rosa didn't know was that her prediction would prove prophetic in ways that would inspire an entire family to believe in the power of seeing potential where others see problems. The date was December 18, 2018. Rosa Williams sat in her worn recliner in the small living room of her Oklahoma City home, watching the Thunder play the Lakers on her 32-inch television that had been a Christmas gift from her grandson 5 years earlier. At 84 years old, Rosa had been a basketball fan for 7 decades, dating back to the days when games were played in tiny gymnasiums and broadcast on grainy black and white TVs. Rosa lived alone in the house she had shared with her late husband for 43 years, maintaining her independence despite her family's concerns about her age and health. Her great-grandson, Marcus, visited her every Tuesday evening to help with groceries and household tasks, but their visits had become more meaningful because of their shared love of basketball. "Grandma Rosa, this Thunder team is terrible this year," Marcus said as he settled onto the couch beside her chair. "They traded away all their good players and this rookie they got looks completely lost out there." Marcus was referring to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was struggling through his first NBA season after being acquired in the Paul George trade. The young player was averaging modest statistics and appeared overwhelmed by the speed and complexity of professional basketball. Rosa watched Shai carefully as he dribbled the ball up court, noting details that escaped casual observers. She had developed an eye for basketball talent through decades of watching games, and something about Shai's demeanor and approach caught her attention in ways that his statistics didn't reflect. "Marcus, hand me my notebook," Rosa said, pointing to the small spiral pad she used to jot down observations about players and games. "Grandma, you're not seriously going to take notes on this game, are you? The Thunder are losing by 20 points. Rosa smiled as she opened her notebook to a fresh page. "Some of the most important things you learn about people happen when they're struggling, not when they're succeeding." But what Rosa observed during that game would lead to a prediction that would seem impossible to everyone who heard it. Rosa began writing detailed notes about Shai's body language, decision-making, and interactions with teammates. While other viewers focused on his missed shots and turnovers, Rosa was studying more subtle indicators of character and potential. She noted how Shai encouraged teammates after their mistakes, how he maintained composure during difficult moments, and how he seemed to be processing and learning from every experience rather than becoming frustrated or discouraged. "Marcus, watch how that young man responds when things go wrong," Rosa said, pointing at the screen as Shai committed a turnover but immediately sprinted back on defense. "See how he doesn't hang his head or blame others. That's the sign of someone who's going to be special." Marcus looked at his great-grandmother with affection but skepticism. "Grandma Rosa, he's shooting 30% from three-point range and looks confused half the time. I think your love for the game is making you see things that aren't there." Rosa's response would prove to be one of the most accurate talent evaluations in basketball history. "Marcus, write this down so you remember it later. That young man will be one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. I've been watching this game for 70 years, and I know greatness when I see it, even when it's still developing." Marcus dutifully wrote down his great-grandmother's prediction in his phone, planning to tease her about it later when Shai's career inevitably failed to meet her impossibly high expectations. However, what Rosa saw in Shai during the following weeks would validate her evaluation and demonstrate the wisdom that comes from decades of careful observation. Rosa began watching every Thunder game with increased focus, filling her notebook with observations about Shai's gradual improvement and adaptation to NBA basketball. While sports commentators criticized his inconsistent play, Rosa was documenting evidence of steady development that others were missing. "He's learning something new every game," Rosa told Marcus during one of their Tuesday visits. "Watch how his decision-making is getting better, how his confidence is growing, how his teammates are starting to trust him more." Rosa pointed out subtle improvements in Shai's positioning, ball handling, and court awareness that weren't reflected in box scores but indicated rapid skill development and basketball IQ growth. "Grandma, I'll give you that he's gotten a little better," Marcus conceded. "But going from getting a little better to greatest ever is a pretty big leap." Rosa smiled knowingly. "Marcus, greatness isn't about where someone starts, it's about how quickly they learn and how much they care about improving. This young man has both qualities in abundance." But what Rosa observed about Shai's character during adversity would prove to be the most important factor in her accurate prediction. During a particularly difficult stretch in February when Shai was struggling with his shooting and facing criticism from local media, Rosa noticed something that convinced her that her evaluation was correct. "Marcus, look at his face," Rosa said during a timeout when cameras showed Shai on the bench. "He's not pouting or making excuses. He's studying the game, talking to coaches, figuring out how to get better." Rosa had seen hundreds of young players struggle with adversity over the decades, and she had learned to distinguish between those who would overcome challenges and those who would be defeated by them. "The players who become great are the ones who use difficult times as learning experiences rather than reasons to give up," Rosa explained. "This young man has that quality." But Rosa's confidence in her prediction was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Thunder's season ended without a playoff appearance, and Shai's rookie statistics were considered disappointing by most basketball analysts. During the offseason, several sports writers suggested that he might be a bust who would never justify the expectations that came with being part of the Paul George trade. "Grandma Rosa, are you still sure about your prediction?" Marcus asked during a summer visit when they were discussing the Thunder's upcoming season. "The experts are saying Shai might not even be a starter next year." Rosa's response demonstrated the conviction that came from trusting her own evaluation over popular opinion. "Marcus, experts said a lot of things about players I've watched over the years. They said Michael Jordan was too small, they said Magic Johnson couldn't shoot, they said Tim Duncan was boring. I learned to trust what I see with my own eyes." Rosa explained that her prediction wasn't based on Shai's current performance but on the rate of his improvement and the character traits she had observed during his rookie challenges. "That young man is going to surprise a lot of people, including the experts who think they know everything about basketball." However, what happened during Shai's second season would begin to validate Rosa's evaluation in ways that amazed even her. Shai's improvement during his sophomore year was dramatic and undeniable. His scoring average nearly doubled, his efficiency improved significantly, and his leadership qualities became apparent to everyone who watched Thunder games. "Grandma, I think you might be onto something," Marcus admitted during a January visit when they were watching Shai dominate a game against the Lakers. "He's looking like a completely different player from last year." Rosa smiled as she updated her notebook with observations about Shai's continued development. "Marcus, this is just the beginning. Wait until you see what he looks like in a few more years." But what impressed Rosa most wasn't Shai's improved statistics. It was his continued growth mindset and commitment to team success over individual recognition. "Watch how he sets up his teammates," Rosa pointed out during a particularly impressive Shai performance. "He could score 30 points tonight if he wanted to, but he's more interested in making sure everyone gets involved and the team wins." Rosa had observed that the truly great players were those who understood basketball as a team sport and used their individual talents to elevate collective performance. "That's the mark of a true champion," Rosa explained. "He's not just getting better as a player, he's becoming a leader who makes everyone around him better." But the validation of Rosa's prediction would accelerate beyond even her optimistic expectations. By Shai's third season, he was being discussed as one of the NBA's rising superstars. His improvement had been so rapid and comprehensive that basketball analysts were beginning to project him as a future MVP candidate. "Grandma Rosa, I owe you an apology," Marcus said during their weekly visit in March 2021. "You saw something in Shai that nobody else could see and you were completely right." Marcus had been tracking Rosa's prediction and was amazed by how accurate her evaluation had been, even when it seemed impossible. "How did you know?" Marcus asked. "What did you see that made you so confident?" Rosa's answer revealed the wisdom that comes from decades of careful observation and experience. "Marcus, I've watched thousands of players over 70 years. The ones who become great all have the same qualities. They learn from mistakes instead of being discouraged by them, they care more about team success than personal recognition, and they never stop trying to improve." Rosa explained that she had seen these qualities in Shai from his very first games, even when his performance didn't reflect his potential. "Talent is common," Rosa said. "Character is rare. When you find someone who has both, you're looking at future greatness." However, the most meaningful moment of validation for Rosa's prediction came when Shai won his first MVP award. During the MVP presentation ceremony, Marcus sat beside Rosa in their usual spots, both of them emotional as they watched the young player Rosa had believed in from the beginning receive basketball's highest individual honor. "Grandma, you called this 4 years ago when nobody else saw it coming," Marcus said, tears in his eyes. "You predicted he would be one of the greatest ever, and he's proving you right." Rosa watched Shai's acceptance speech with pride and satisfaction, not because her prediction had been correct, but because she had witnessed the development of someone who exemplified the best qualities of human character and athletic excellence. But what happened next would demonstrate that Rosa's influence had extended beyond just accurate prediction. Marcus had been so inspired by his great-grandmother's ability to recognize potential and character that he had begun volunteering as a youth basketball coach, using Rosa's insights to identify and encourage young players who might be overlooked by others. "Grandma Rosa, you taught me to look for character and work ethic instead of just current ability," Marcus explained during one of their visits. "I'm working with kids who remind me of how Shai looked during his rookie year, raw talent but incredible determination." Marcus described how he had applied Rosa's evaluation principles to identify young players who had the potential for significant improvement, regardless of their current skill level. "I've got 3 kids on my team who other coaches said weren't good enough for competitive leagues. But they have the same qualities you saw in Shai. They learn from mistakes, they work harder than anyone else, and they care more about team success than individual statistics." Rosa was delighted that her approach to evaluating character and potential was being passed down to another generation and used to help young people who might otherwise be overlooked. But the most touching recognition of Rosa's wisdom came from an unexpected source. During an interview about his development and success, Shai was asked about the people who had believed in him during his early career when others had doubts. "There's an 84-year-old grandmother in Oklahoma City who saw something in me during my rookie year that I didn't even see in myself," Shai said during the interview. "I never met her, but I heard through mutual friends that she was telling people I would be great when I was struggling to average double digits." Shai described how learning about Rosa's early confidence in his potential had provided motivation during difficult moments throughout his career. "Knowing that someone who had watched basketball for 70 years believed in me when I was at my lowest point gave me strength to keep working when others doubted." When Marcus told Rosa about Shai's comments, she was moved to tears by the realization that her faith in a young player had somehow reached him and provided encouragement during his development. However, the most important legacy of Rosa's prediction wasn't its accuracy, it was the lesson it taught about the power of seeing potential in people when they're struggling. Rosa's story spread throughout Oklahoma City and eventually gained national attention as an example of wisdom, faith, and the importance of recognizing character over current performance. During interviews about her prediction, Rosa emphasized that her ability to evaluate Shai wasn't about basketball expertise, it was about understanding human nature and recognizing the qualities that lead to success in any field. "I've been watching people for 84 years, Rosa explained. "The ones who succeed in life are the ones who learn from their mistakes, care about others, and never stop trying to improve. Those qualities show up in basketball just like they show up everywhere else." Rosa's approach to evaluation became a model for coaches, scouts, and mentors who learned to look beyond current performance to identify character traits and growth potential. 2 years later, when Shai won his second MVP award, the broadcast included a feature segment about Rosa and her remarkable prediction, introducing her to a national audience as the grandmother who saw greatness before anyone else. During the segment, Rosa was interviewed in her living room, surrounded by notebooks filled with observations about players she had watched over the decades. "People ask me how I knew Shai would be great," Rosa said during the interview. "But the truth is, I didn't predict his greatness, I recognized it. The greatness was already there in his character and his approach to improvement. I just saw it before it became obvious to everyone else." As the segment concluded with footage of Shai's MVP ceremony and Rosa watching proudly from her chair, viewers understood that sometimes the most important insights come from people who combine experience, wisdom, and the ability to see potential where others see problems. "That young man fights like a soldier," whispered 67-year-old Army veteran Thomas Mitchell as he watched Shai Gilgeous-Alexander lead the Thunder's comeback from a 30-point deficit. Thomas had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan and thought his war days were behind him, but watching Shai's relentless determination triggered memories of the brotherhood, sacrifice, and mental toughness that had kept him alive in combat. What Thomas didn't know was that recognizing those same warrior qualities in a basketball player would lead him to discover that the fight for excellence never truly ends, it just changes battlefields. The date was March 22, 2023. Thomas Mitchell sat alone in his small apartment in Oklahoma City, watching the Thunder play the Denver Nuggets on a television that was his only companion most evenings. At 67 years old, Thomas had been retired from the Army for 12 years, but he had never quite adjusted to civilian life after serving 3 combat tours in Afghanistan between 2008 and 2011. Thomas lived on a modest military pension and disability benefits, struggling with PTSD that made social interactions difficult and meaningful relationships nearly impossible. His days followed a rigid routine: morning coffee, afternoon walk, evening basketball games that provided temporary distraction from the memories that haunted his sleep. Most nights, Thomas watched sports with detached interest, using the games as background noise to fill the silence of his apartment. But tonight's Thunder game was different. The team was facing a massive deficit against the defending champions, and most fans had already given up hope for a comeback. But as Thomas watched Shai Gilgeous-Alexander refuse to surrender despite the overwhelming odds, something stirred inside him that he hadn't felt since his military service ended. "That young man fights like a soldier," Thomas whispered to himself as Shai dove for a loose ball with the Thunder trailing by 30 points. The intensity and determination in Shai's eyes reminded Thomas of fellow soldiers who had never quit, even when missions seemed impossible. Thomas had seen that look before, in the faces of men who continued fighting when they were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. It was the expression of someone who understood that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite overwhelming challenges. As the game progressed, Thomas found himself leaning forward in his chair, completely absorbed by Shai's leadership and refusal to accept defeat. With each steal, assist, and clutch shot, Thomas saw parallels to the mental toughness and tactical thinking that had kept his unit alive during their most dangerous missions. He's not just playing basketball, Thomas realized. He's conducting a military operation. But what Thomas observed during the final quarter would trigger memories and emotions he had kept buried for over a decade. Shai's approach to the comeback was methodical and strategic, exactly like the planning process Thomas had learned in the military. Instead of panicking or forcing desperate shots, Shai was breaking down the 30-point deficit into smaller, manageable objectives: get stops, score efficiently, maintain composure under pressure. Secure the perimeter, advance position by position, never give ground, Thomas found himself saying aloud, using military terminology to describe Shai's basketball strategy. Thomas watched as Shai orchestrated the Thunder's comeback with the same systematic approach that successful military operations required. Each possession was treated like a crucial tactical decision, with Shai reading the defense, communicating with teammates, and executing with precision under extreme pressure. The parallels to combat leadership were undeniable. Shai wasn't just trying to score points, he was inspiring his teammates to believe in victory when defeat seemed certain, exactly like the squad leaders Thomas had served with who kept morale high during the darkest moments of deployment. "Get your head up, Johnson," Thomas remembered his sergeant yelling during a particularly difficult mission. "We don't quit until the mission is complete." Watching Shai encourage his teammates with similar intensity and conviction brought tears to Thomas's eyes as memories of brotherhood and shared purpose flooded back. But what happened when the Thunder completed their comeback would create an emotional breakthrough that Thomas hadn't experienced since returning from war. With 30 seconds remaining, Shai hit a three-pointer that gave the Thunder their first lead of the game, completing a comeback that sports commentators were calling impossible and miraculous. Thomas stood up from his chair, saluting the television as the final buzzer sounded and Shai was mobbed by his teammates. For the first time in 12 years, Thomas felt the pride, purpose, and emotional connection that he had lost when his military service ended. "Mission accomplished, soldier," Thomas said to the screen, using the phrase that had marked successful operations during his deployment. The comeback had reminded Thomas of everything he missed about military service: the camaraderie, the shared commitment to something larger than individual success, and the satisfaction of achieving objectives that others believed were impossible. But more importantly, watching Shai's leadership had shown Thomas that the qualities he valued most about military service, courage, determination, and the ability to inspire others during difficult moments, existed outside the military and could be found in unexpected places. However, what Thomas decided to do as a result of watching that game would lead to the most meaningful relationships he had formed since leaving the Army. Thomas began watching every Thunder game with new interest, studying Shai's approach to leadership and drawing parallels between basketball strategy and military tactics. He started taking notes in a composition book, documenting examples of how athletic competition could teach valuable lessons about teamwork, resilience, and mental toughness. If this young man can lead a basketball comeback using military principles, Thomas thought, maybe I can use military principles to help other veterans who are struggling with civilian life. Thomas had been attending monthly meetings at the local Veterans Affairs office, but the sessions were typically focused on medical issues and benefit claims rather than the emotional and psychological challenges of transitioning from military to civilian purpose. Inspired by Shai's example of using individual excellence to elevate team performance, Thomas decided to propose a new type of support group that would help veterans find meaning and community through shared activities and mutual encouragement. But what happened when Thomas presented his idea would demonstrate that leadership lessons from basketball could transform how veterans supported each other. Thomas approached Maria Santos, the VA counselor who facilitated veteran support groups, with his proposal for a program that would combine recreational activities with peer mentoring and skills development. Maria, I've been thinking about how we could help veterans find the same sense of purpose and brotherhood in civilian life that we had in the military, Thomas explained during their meeting. What if we created a program based on the leadership principles I've been observing in professional athletes? Thomas described how watching Shai's approach to teamwork and pressure management had reminded him of the positive aspects of military service and inspired him to reconnect with other veterans in meaningful ways. Thomas, that's an interesting idea, Maria replied. But how would athletic leadership translate to veteran support services? Thomas opened his composition book and shared his observations about Shai's leadership style, drawing parallels between basketball strategy and military tactics that could be applied to civilian challenges. This player approaches every game like a mission, Thomas explained. He identifies objectives, develops strategies, adapts to changing circumstances, and never abandons his teammates. Those are exactly the skills that made us effective soldiers, and they're the same skills we need to navigate civilian life successfully. Maria was intrigued by Thomas's analysis and agreed to let him pilot a veteran support program based on leadership principles derived from athletic competition. However, what happened during the first meeting of Thomas's support group would prove that military veterans and professional athletes shared more common ground than anyone had realized. 8 veterans attended the first meeting of what Thomas called the Tactical Leadership Support Group. The participants ranged in age from 28 to 72 and represented different branches of military service and combat experiences. Thomas began the session by showing video clips of Shai's comeback against Denver, asking participants to identify leadership principles and tactical strategies that they recognized from their own military training. Look at how he communicates with his teammates during timeouts, Thomas pointed out during one clip. He's not yelling or panicking, he's providing clear, actionable instructions that keep everyone focused on the mission. Vietnam veteran Robert Chin immediately recognized the parallel. That's exactly what our squad leader did during firefights. Stay calm, give simple orders, keep everyone focused on survival and objectives. Iraq War veteran Jessica Martinez added her own observation. And watch how he takes responsibility when things go wrong but gives credit to teammates when things go right. That's textbook military leadership. The discussion continued for 2 hours as veterans analyzed Shai's leadership approach and shared stories about how similar principles had applied during their own military service. But the most powerful moment came when Thomas asked participants to identify how those same leadership principles could help them address current challenges in civilian life. I've been struggling with my construction job because I get frustrated when coworkers don't meet deadlines, admitted Afghanistan veteran David Kim. But watching how this player stays patient and keeps encouraging his teammates even when they make mistakes, maybe I need to apply that approach at work. Several other veterans shared similar insights about how athletic leadership examples could guide their approaches to employment, relationships, and personal goals. However, the real transformation happened when the group decided to apply their military training to community service projects. Inspired by Shai's commitment to using his platform for positive community impact, the veterans decided to volunteer for local organizations that needed systematic project management and leadership skills. Thomas organized the group to support a youth mentorship program, using military planning principles to develop structured activities that taught young people about goal setting, teamwork, and perseverance. We're going to approach this like a military operation, Thomas explained during their planning session. Clear objectives, defined roles, contingency plans, and regular evaluation of our effectiveness. The veterans applied their military training to develop a program that taught children from disadvantaged backgrounds about leadership, responsibility, and the importance of never giving up on difficult goals. But what happened when Shai learned about the veteran support group would create an opportunity for mutual inspiration that neither side had anticipated. Through a mutual connection at the Thunder organization, Shai heard about Thomas's support group and their use of basketball leadership examples to help veterans transition to civilian life. Mr. Mitchell, I understand that you've been using examples from my games to help other veterans, Shai said during a phone call that Maria Santos had arranged. I'd like to learn more about your program and see if there are ways I can support what you're doing. Thomas was amazed to hear from Shai directly and explained how watching the Thunder's comeback had inspired him to reconnect with other veterans and find new purpose in civilian life. "Shai, your leadership reminded me of everything I valued about military service," Thomas said. "You showed me that the principles we learned in the Army, courage, teamwork, never quitting, are just as important in civilian life." Shai's response revealed how much the conversation meant to him. "Mr. Mitchell, hearing that my approach to basketball reminds you of military leadership is one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. I've always tried to approach games with the same discipline and commitment that I imagine soldiers bring to their missions." The conversation led to Shai visiting the veteran support group and sharing his own thoughts about mental toughness, team building, and maintaining focus during difficult challenges. However, the most meaningful outcome of their partnership was how it helped both veterans and Shai understand that excellence requires the same fundamental qualities regardless of the arena. During Shai's visit to the support group, he talked about the mental preparation and strategic thinking required for professional basketball, while the veterans shared insights about leadership under pressure and maintaining morale during extended challenges. "What's interesting is that we're all talking about the same principles," observed veteran counselor Maria Santos during the session. "Whether it's military combat, professional athletics, or civilian life challenges, success requires discipline, teamwork, and the ability to stay focused on long-term objectives." The meeting concluded with both Shai and the veterans agreeing to maintain regular contact and continue learning from each other's experiences with high-pressure performance and leadership development. 6 months later, Thomas's support group had expanded to include 30 veterans from across Oklahoma, and their community service programs were being replicated in other cities. But perhaps the most important transformation was personal. Thomas had found new purpose and community connection that filled the void left by the end of his military service. "Watching Shai fight like a soldier reminded me that I'm still a soldier," Thomas reflected during an interview about the support group's success. "The mission just changed from protecting my fellow soldiers to helping my fellow veterans find their place in civilian society." Thomas had discovered that the leadership skills and mental toughness developed during military service could be applied to any challenge, and that finding ways to serve others was the key to maintaining sense of purpose and identity after combat deployment ended. During the Thunder's next playoff run, Thomas and several members of his support group attended games wearing military dress uniforms, carrying signs that read, "Tactical Leadership in Action," and cheering for Shai with the same intensity they had brought to supporting fellow soldiers during deployment. The image of veterans saluting Shai after clutch performances became a symbol of the connection between military service and athletic excellence, demonstrating that courage and leadership are universal qualities that transcend specific professions or circumstances. 2 years later, when Shai won his second MVP award, he dedicated part of his acceptance speech to Thomas and the veteran support group. "Mr. Thomas Mitchell taught me that the qualities required for basketball success, discipline, teamwork, and never giving up, are the same qualities that our military veterans demonstrate every day," Shai said during the ceremony. "I'm honored that my approach to basketball reminds anyone of the courage and commitment shown by people who served our country." As Thomas watched from the audience, wearing his military dress uniform and surrounded by fellow veterans who had found new purpose through their support group, he realized that his journey from combat soldier to civilian mentor had come full circle. The veteran who saw himself in Shai had learned that military service never truly ends, it just evolves into different forms of leadership and service that continue to make a positive impact on communities and individuals who need guidance, support, and examples of what it means to never surrender in the face of adversity. And in Oklahoma City, where a basketball arena had become a place where military veterans found inspiration and a professional athlete found deeper meaning in his platform, they understood that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with courage, character, and the commitment to lift others up when they need it most. And in Oklahoma City, where an 84-year-old woman's notebook contained accurate evaluations of basketball greatness that professional scouts had missed, they understood that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, and that the ability to see the best in people when they're struggling is one of the most powerful gifts anyone can possess. Rosa Williams had spent 70 years watching basketball, but her greatest contribution to the game was teaching others to look beyond current performance and recognize the character traits that predict future excellence, a lesson that would influence coaches, players, and fans for generations to come.